Hi, welcome to lesson 33 of the B2 course. So this is our second lesson on the topic of gerund and infinitive. My name's Stephanie, this is level B2 or upper intermediate, and we are on lesson 33. So in this lesson, we're going to look at verbs that can take either the gerund or the infinitive. If you remember back in lesson 31, we looked at sets of verbs that take either the gerund or the infinitive. Well, in this lesson, we're going to look at verbs that can take both, and we will examine how this changes the meaning. We're going to focus on 4 verbs while we do this: remember, try, like, and stop. Okay, let's start. So, in lesson 31, we looked at rules. We looked at sets of verbs which always take a gerund and which verbs always take an infinitive form. This lesson, we're going to look at verbs which can take either. So it's very important in this lesson because there isn't a rule that you can remember these verbs take the gerund or they take the infinitive. It's very important that you understand why the meaning changes and how the meaning changes so that you can correctly choose the right form. Okay, so let's have a look at a complete list of these verbs that I'm talking about. So these are the verbs that can be followed by either a gerund or an infinitive. Begin, continue, forget. Hate, like, love. Neglect, prefer, regret. Remember, start, stop. And try. So this is to give you an idea of the verbs which can be followed by either the gerund or the infinitive. But as always, the advice I always give you, when you have a long list of words or verbs, it's impossible to try to remember everything. So my advice always is to choose some of the most useful and to try to practice using those, because that way you're more likely to assimilate and be able to use them than if you try to remember long lists. So the verbs we're going to focus on today are remember, try, like, and stop. So 4 very common verbs in the English language and 4 verbs which I'm sure you regularly use. Okay, so let's start with our first verb, which is remember. Okay, I want you to compare the use of remember in these sentences. Number 1. I know I locked the car. I remember locking it. Number 2. I remember driving in the south of France. The scenery was beautiful. Number 3. I remembered to post the letter. Number 4. I remembered to pay my phone bill. So sentences 1 and 2 use remember plus, and sentences 3 and 4 use remember plus. Okay, so sentences 1 and 2 are remember plus the gerund, remember locking, remember driving. But sentences 3 and 4 are remember plus the infinitive, remember to post, remember to pay. So I'd like you to pause the slide a minute and see if you can understand, see if you can see how this might change the meaning. What's the difference in meaning between 1 and 2 and sentences 3 and 4? So it's a really good idea here to pause the slide to give you some time to think. Okay. Any ideas? What do you think? Did you have any idea of why and how the meaning changes depending on whether it's remember locking or remember to lock, for example? Well, let's have a look together. So if you use remember and a gerund form, it means you did something in the past and now you remember it. So you remember doing something after the action. Example, I remember locking the door because the key was difficult. The first action was locking and the second action was remember. So the important thing is what happened first. If it's remember after, then you need to use the gerund form in the other verb. I remember locking the door because the key was difficult. First action, locking. Second action, remember. But if you use remember and infinitive, it means I remembered that I had to do something and so I did it. In this case, you remember before. So please remember to lock the front door. You need to remember first and then you need to do the action. So the crucial thing here is what happened first. Okay, so again, maybe a good idea to pause the slide here just to review this idea. The key thing is when the action of remember happened. Okay, so are we ready to do some practice? So we're going to have a look at 3 sentences. All use the verb remember, and I've given you the second verb, but what you need to think is what happened first. Let's try. Number 1, if you see the teacher, remember, I'll be late. When you're in the shop, remember, milk. Number 3, I remember school. Number 4, I remember my driving test. I was so nervous. Number 5, I must remember money from the cash point. And number 6, I remember in hospital when I was a child. So your verbs in brackets that I've given you either need to be the gerund or the infinitive form, depending on whether they happened before or after the act of remember. So pause the slide and see if you can complete the 6 sentences. Okay, let's have a look at the answers together. Number 1, if you see the teacher, remember to say, I'll be late. Remember happens first, the action to say second. When you are in the shop, remember to buy milk. Remember happens first, buy happens second. I remember starting school. Starting school happened first, remember second. Number 4, I remember taking my driving test. I was so nervous. Taking the test happened first, then remember. Number 5, I must remember to get money from the cash point. Here, remember happens first, then get money. And number 6, I remember being in hospital when I was a child. Being in hospital was the first action, and you remember when you look back, so it's a second action. Really well done if you managed to get those 6 correct. Okay, let's move on to our second verb, which is try. Okay, so let's have a look at the use of try and gerund and try and infinitive and see if you can match to the meaning A or B. I tried talking to her. I tried to talk to her. So one of these sentences means I couldn't talk to her. It was impossible. Another means I talked to her, but it was no use. It was unsuccessful. Pause the slide and see if you can tell me which is which. Okay. Well, I tried talking to her means I succeeded in talking, but it was no use. Maybe, for example, you were trying to change her mind. You could say, I tried talking to her, but it was no use. I couldn't change her mind. I tried to talk to her means I couldn't. So maybe she wasn't there, maybe you were calling on the phone and she didn't answer, but it was a failure you couldn't actually succeed in talking to her. So try plus the gerund means you do the action, but it's unsuccessful. But try and infinitive means you fail to do something. You don't manage to do the action. So in our example, I tried to talk to her. Perhaps if you're knocking at the door and she doesn't answer, it's a failure. You didn't manage to talk. So you would say, I tried to talk to her. Okay, so it's quite a fine line there. You need to remember that rule. But the best way to remember a rule is by practice. And let's practice. We have 6 sentences. Let's have a look. I was so sleepy, I tried my eyes open, but I couldn't. Number 2, I tried on the door, but there was no answer. Number 3, we tried the fire out, but we couldn't. Number 4, I didn't have enough money for the car park. I tried my friend, but she didn't have any change. Number 5, I tried the shelf, but I wasn't tall enough. And number 6, please leave me alone. I'm trying. Okay, so have a look at these sentences and remember you need to think, was the action successful or unsuccessful? And that will decide whether you use the gerund or the infinitive form. Okay, so quite a tricky one, this one. Well done if you managed to get some of these correct. Let's have a look together. I was so sleepy, I tried to keep my eyes open, but I couldn't. Number 2, I tried knocking on the door, but there was no answer. Number 3, we tried to put the fire out, but we couldn't. Number 4, I didn't have enough money for the car park. I tried asking my friend, but she didn't have any change. Number 5, I tried to reach the shelf, but I wasn't tall enough. And number 6, please be quiet. I'm trying to study. So hopefully this will help make it clearer. If you look at the forms with the infinitive, tried to keep my eyes open, but I couldn't. We tried to put the fire out, but we couldn't. I tried to reach the shelf, but I wasn't tall enough. I'm trying to study. You try to do something, but you fail. I try to keep my eyes open. I'm so sleepy, but I can't because I'm so tired. But sentences 2 and 4, I tried knocking on the door. You actually knocked on the door. Even if the result was unsuccessful, you did the action. The same with number 4. I tried asking my friend. I asked her, but the result was unsuccessful. But you still asked the question. So quite a challenging one, that with try, and it's something that you need to practice a lot. With things like reading, that will help because you can read when people use the infinitive, when they're using the gerund, and it becomes a much more natural process. It feels right. Okay, time to move on to our third verb today, which is one of the most popular verbs that you'll use in English, I'm sure. That's the verb like. Okay, so let's have a look at some examples with like. compare these sentences, what do you think the difference in meaning is? Number 1, I like to keep all my credit card receipts just in case the bank makes a mistake. Number 2, I like going skiing in the winter. Number 3, I like to visit the dentist once every 6 months for a checkup. Number 4, I like travelling and visiting new places. Pause the slide and see if you can understand what do you think the difference is when you use like and an infinitive and like and a gerund form. I'll give you a clue. Look at the activities that follow. Did you manage to guess this? Well, this is quite a nice one, I think. It's much easier than try. Basically, we use like and infinitive if you think it's a good idea. So our examples were, I like to keep all my credit card receipts and I like to visit the dentist. These aren't something you enjoy doing, but you think they are a good idea. However, like and the gerund simply means I enjoy it. I like going skiing in the winter. I like travelling and visiting new places. Means I enjoy these things. So this is a nice, easy rule to remember. Like an infinitive, I think it's a good idea. Like and gerund, I enjoy it. As always, we're going to practice. I have 6 sentences for you. Think about whether it's something you're likely to enjoy or whether it's something that you think is a good idea. Okay, number 1, I like to bed early during the week. Number 2, I like to the cinema with my friends. Number 3, I like my notes in alphabetical order. Number 4, I like slowly in the rain. Number 5, I like a health check once a year. And number 6, I like in the winter months. So pause the slide and put the verb in the gerund if it's something you enjoy, in the infinitive if you think it's a good idea. Okay, hopefully I'm thinking that you can get 6 out of 6 here. I like to go to bed early during the week. I think this is a good idea because I have to get up for work. I like going to the cinema with my friends. I like to file my notes in alphabetical order. I like to drive slowly in the rain because it's dangerous to drive fast. I like to have a health check once a year. And I like skiing in the winter months. So well done if you managed to get all 6 correct there. Okay, and that brings us to our last verb that we're going to look at today, which is the verb stop. Okay, so as with the other verbs, we will have a look at the rules and then we will practice. Okay. Read what happened first and what happened second, and then decide which sentence is correct, A or B. So first action, he used to smoke a lot. Second action, he stopped 2 years ago. So our 2 options, A, I stopped to smoke 2 years ago, or B, I stopped smoking 2 years ago. So pause the slide and maybe think what sounds most natural in this situation. Okay, let's have a look at another example. So again, read what happened first, what happened second, and then decide which sentence is correct, A or B. So the first sentence, he was working, but he stopped. Second, and smoked a cigarette? A, I stopped to smoke a cigarette. Or B, I stopped smoking a cigarette. Again, good idea here to pause the slide, maybe review with the previous slide and see which sentence A or B is correct, which fits the situation. Okay, let's have a look together. So, he used to smoke a lot, but he stopped 2 years ago. The correct answer is, I stopped smoking 2 years ago. He was working, but he stopped and smoked a cigarette. I stopped to smoke a cigarette. So the rule here is, if the action of stop happened first, you use an infinitive. So in our second sentence, you stop first and then you smoke the cigarette. But in the first sentence, smoking happened first and stop happened second. So the important thing here is, when did stop happen? If the action of stop happened first, use an infinitive. But if the action of stop happened second, then you need to use a gerund. Again, as always, the best way to make something clear is to practice. So we'll have a look with 6 sentences. The same idea as before, all with the verb stop, and you're going to decide, is it a gerund or infinitive that follows this. Number 1, he stopped, give directions to the tourist. Number 2, the passenger stopped and listened to the announcement. Number 3, I stop in the winter, the air is too cold. Number 4, the teacher stopped the lesson, the question. Number 5, the car stopped, the child crossed the road. And number 6, will you please stop? So I've given you the verbs. You need to put them in the gerund or the infinitive depending on, did stop happen before or after the verb. So look at sentence 1, he stopped. Your verb is give. What happened first? Stop or give directions? Okay, pause the slide and write down your answers. Again, a challenging one, but let's see how you did. Okay, so let's get the answers. Number 1, he stopped to give directions to the tourist. First action is stop, second action is give. Number 2, the passengers stopped talking and listened to the announcement. So talking happened first and then stop. Number 3, I stopped running in the winter, the air is too cold. Again, running happens first and then I stop. But number 4, the teacher stopped the lesson to answer the question. Stopped happened first, then answer the question. Number 5, the car stopped to let the child cross the road. Stop happened first, then let the child cross the road. And number 6, will you please stop shouting? Someone is shouting and you say, please stop. Okay, so stop happened second. So again, quite challenging, so very well done if you managed to get 6 correct. This is something that you need to practice and practice. There is also a mini test at the end of this lesson, which will let you practice some more. And it's something we will look at again in our review lesson 35. It's a really important topic, this. When we think about improving your level of English, this is something that you need to think about. Being able to use the language to convey your meaning exactly and correctly. So this is a very important topic. Thank you for joining me for lesson 33. Next time, lesson 34 is a vocabulary lesson on a topic that we can all relate to, sleep, and we will be looking at how modern lifestyle impacts on our sleep patterns. So a very interesting and relevant topic for modern life, and I hope you will join me then. But for now, thank you for watching. I will see you next time.